Hello and welcome to this new episode of the podcast Productive You. I'm Priscilla Venet, your host for this episode, and I'm very delighted to receive today Kathryn Simpson. She will be our invitee for today. Kathryn is, as she said in her website, a change leadership expert. She has an extensive experience in consulting and change management. And I am very glad to receive her as she is the author of a very famous book called Leading for Change. Hello, Kathryn.
Hello, thank you very much. It's great to be here. What a lovely introduction too.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
How are you today? It's okay for you to be
Everything's
there?
good. Yes, thank you.
So, as I mentioned, we met each other 18 months ago, 12 months ago, I don't remember, in a webinar. I remember
Yes.
it was organized by B2A Consulting. And you mentioned at this point your book, which was about to come or something like that. We had a discussion together. You sent me this book, and I really, really appreciate it. So thank you very much for sent it to me. And I recommended it to many of my friends. And just to mention that at this introduction, that yesterday I had a lunch with one of my former colleague, and she had some trouble in the past, quite recently, with change management, and I suggested to her to buy it, and she said, "That's marvelous, thank you very much." And and when she heard yesterday that I was having this interview with you, she said, "Please thank her for this book because it's very, very important and it's very useful." So that's.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
and such great stories that keep coming back to me, which is wonderful.
Oh, okay. So, what makes you write this book? What was the origin of this book?
It's very interesting because, and we were just talking about when people tell you enough times that you should do something, eventually you think, maybe I should do. And this started about 3 or 4 years ago when someone said, would you write for our ebook that we're putting on? So this was Hannah at Bridge Marketing. She was writing a book and she said, just write a paragraph. And I said, I don't really write. I'm a facilitator. I'm not a writer. I love being with people and teams and organizations and helping them. I don't like writing. She said, well, can you just write a paragraph? So I wrote a paragraph and that was easy. So I'll write 2 or 3 paragraphs. And then someone said, well, you should be blogging. Okay, I'll blog. And so every couple of weeks I would do 500 words and post it on LinkedIn. And then someone said, when are you going to write your book? Because you've got enough material here to put all of this together and have a book. And so that was part of it, was one of the pressure. But I guess then when I started to think about that, well, why am I writing this book? It was because, I really did want to celebrate all the great leaders that I've worked with. And, it's them that I've learned from, and it's their experiences that I'm relating and pulling out some of the key factors that I think have led to their successes. So that's the reason why I've written it. Is 1, pressure, and 2, because I want to celebrate these great leaders.
Oh, that's the nice stories. Thank you for sharing it with us. And what I really appreciate about your book, so it's something like 200 pages or so. It's like a concentrate of change methods. And the approach you have, it's based on experiences. There is a bit of a theory, but we also see really how you use it. And we really realize that there is not one fits all method for all type of change management within an enterprise or a company, but it's really the facilitators or the leaders who is in charge of this change management, who has to pick the right tool. And it's more like your book, it's more like a toolbox when you can go and pick the tool you need depending on the size of your organization, the type of project, and it's really relevant when you have yourself an issue with a change to go inside this book and find quickly an answer.
Yeah, and that's, that was very deliberate. That I think there's lots of change methods, management methodologies out there, aren't there? And I've been certified in a couple too, and so it's been really good to have those. But in the end, what seemed to work for me is that looking at what the situation demands and then say, okay, I'll take that tool and I'll take that tool and put these together, and this will create something. So that's why actually in the book there's a whole chapter, isn't there, that's called Choose How to Change. And it is one of those where, just everybody realizing that they don't have to follow the rigorous methodologies that are out there. Sometimes that's absolutely what you need to do when it's very complex and it's a large change with a large group of stakeholders. Then yes, those methodologies are fantastic. But other times, no, you can just pull out, here's a tool that I think I can use, and use those. So yes.
Yeah, so that's very powerful, and it's really helped leaders to go straight to the point, not wasting time, reading a lot of materials here and there, and everything is at the same point. And what we really feel reading that is really based on experiences.
Yes.
Because way too often we read books that seems to be a kind of aggregate of different materials coming from different origins. But we don't really know if the writer are even try them or test them. Yeah. And with your experience, and all the time you're mentioning a little stories like the case studies, and then it's analyzed and you explain the tool and so on. So it's really makes us feel that you really experience it and we can rely on your experience.
Yes, and those as I said before, kind of celebrating those experiences and learning from those experiences, that was something that I wanted to be absolutely core to this, and to pull out those specific examples so that people can look at those and go, oh yes, that makes sense, and therefore I can apply it to this situation that I have. So that was really important to have. And the book is pretty much structured on, here's a case study, and as you say, here's what I learned from it, here's some of the key learnings from it, so here's some of the things that you can then go and do in terms of the top tips, if you like, on those different areas. So yes, that's exactly what I wanted to do, so that people could learn about change. And there's lots of you and I have talked about lots of references that back up all of these as well along the way, but that's not the core of the book. So you can actually go in and look at the reference, but it's not what the book's all about. It's more around, here's the experience and here's what you can do about it. So very action oriented, hopefully.
Yeah, that's true. Even so, just by reading your references, because I'm the one when reading, I'm checking all the references. I think I bought 6 or 8 new books. So, oh yes, that's interesting. Oh, let's order it.
Yes.
That's nice that now in Amazon we can have second-hand books. It's less expensive. Okay, yes. And what I really appreciate is that your books is made like a step-by-step. There is this 10 chapter. We start with the role of a change leader, and I would like that later we come on it. Then we build the strategic capability. Then we choose how to change. Have a facilitators, and this one is very interesting. And you mentioned if it's internal or external, and there is a real kind of table where we can really choose with all the information. Involve people, make differences work, measure and monitor success, meet effectively, implement flawlessly, and create effective change leadership for the future success. So it's really a step-by-step process, very well explained. And if we start with the very first one, we will not have time to do all the chapter for sure, but the role of a change leader. Can you just summarize what for you is the role of a change leader?
Yeah, and that's a really important one, because I think one of the things that really frustrates me sometimes when people will say, yes, it's leadership that's really important. We need to have leaders, and they need to lead the change, and so they need to communicate. That's one of the things that I hear a lot about is, yes, they need to communicate, and it is really important that leaders communicate. But I like to think of what do they say, what do they do, and how do they act? And, and how do they reinforce? So those three things are really important. So first of all, the say piece, yes, that's the communication. But if their actions don't back that up, so they're not role modeling, here's the change and here's what it looks like, then their communication and their role modeling is that we don't believe it, so therefore we're not going to do it if we're in the organization. So they have to role model. And then even more important is they have to reinforce. So they have to act if they see something that isn't aligned with the change. If people are still living in the past, or if people are moving into what the desired future are, they need to give either negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement to that and hold people accountable. So that's the role of leadership, is actually not just to communicate, but to act, and to reinforce as well. So those three things are really important. So those for me are the three things. I think in that first chapter, I also talk about lots of definitions, don't I? And I talk about, what strategic planning is, because that's really important, because it's defining what that future state is. And one of the things that I think is important to realize is that there's a lot of terminology that's wrapped up with change and strategic planning, and it needs to be kept, from my opinion, keep it as simple as you possibly can. So just keep it simple. It's all about where you're going, where you are now, and how are you going to close that gap. It's very simple. Instead, we call it strategic initiatives and strategy and success factors. We call it all kinds of lots of management jargon that's been associated with it. And you need, as a leader, to define this is the language that I'm going to use, and then stick to it so everybody gets used to it, and keep it simple if you can. So
yeah, that's powerful. Thank you. Yeah. And one thing I was very impressed by, and I never realized how important it is, because for me, one of the key points in change management is the communication. And very often, I would say way too often, we just miss that part. We just send a few emails and that's it. The communication is done, at least in the industry I've coming from. And that's a pity, because most of the time, because of that, there is some issue later during the implementation. But one point that I realized was very important is to build the capability. And you mentioned at some point how the leader should identify maybe the trainings that the people needs to have or to receive to be able to follow this change, to be able to cope with this change. And very often, I think we just miss those one. We think it's obvious and that they will follow the change. But and really that part was it was a very light for me to say, oh yes, that's very, very important too.
Yeah. And one of the stories I tell is about when I worked with this leadership team, because they came and said, we've got a strategy and we know where we're going, but it just doesn't seem to be happening. And so this is the general manager, and she's saying this about her leadership team. And I said, so what's going on then? And so what I ended up doing is working with each leader and talking about what their part of the pie was. and how were they defining where they were going, how they were going to get there, how does that actually all fit together? And so what I was doing there was coaching them on different aspects of how to deliver that, because I remember very clearly one person who was in sales, he was a VP of sales. He that wasn't his natural tendency to think 5 years out. That was not what his job was about. So I kind of helped him to think 5 years out. Another one had a really, needed to actually get more specific about exactly what it was that she was going to do. So I worked with her, developing measures and metrics, and what does that going to look like? And then a third one, I remember, created this huge PowerPoint deck that he was going to share to explain to the rest of his peers. This was what his strategy was. And no, you need 2 or 3 slides to actually do that. So it was very interesting, because it was all about building leadership capability in order to actually deliver on this change. So that's what, and we did that through the practical. Now we have to do this. Now we have to implement this. So what does that look like? And it was very different for each person. So it was about the coaching part that was really important.
Yeah, and really, and make it works for each and every department, because as you mentioned, it's not something obvious maybe for marketing or for sales or for production. So they have to be aligned, but we need to almost teach them separately, because they don't have the same expectation, they are not coming from the same point, they don't have the same knowledge, and so on. And it's very, very powerful, very interesting.
Yes.
And for you, what is the role of the facilitators in this case?
Yeah, so it's very interesting in the role of the different facilitators, or whether it's facilitators I struggle with as a facilitator or a partner almost through this process. And I think I use the words interchangeably a little bit there. But the role in that case is, yeah, you're facilitating to bring everyone to the same level. So doing a lot of work before meetings to bring everyone to that level. But the facilitator for me is someone who's working in tandem with the leader, who's really helping that leader to clarify, again, what's the output of that process? What if you're thinking in a smaller scale than the overall vision? Let's think about the overall meeting that we're going to have today. What's that all about? What's the outcome? What's the process that we're going to do? What's the agenda that we're going to do to get to that outcome? And asking the questions about input, and let me help you prepare that for you with all of your individual stakeholders. So that could be the role of facilitator if it's needed. In some cases, it's not needed, because if it's more simple than that, then you don't need a facilitator often. So yeah, but collecting that, what sometimes my biggest job is the prep before the meeting, collecting all of that information from the individual leaders so that all of their perspectives are heard, consolidated, reflected back, so we don't spend all the meeting talking about those individual. We're already on that same page, and everybody's had a chance to be listened to, and they've seen the results of that. So that's often one of my biggest roles as a facilitator.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And what about the leader who suddenly become internally a change leader? How we can cope with that? Can you give them some advice on how to deal with it?
So if you're being asked to lead a specific change, yes, yeah. And I would say, take that step back to choose how to change first. So who is it that you need to involve? But even start with, why are we doing this again? So that start with the why. What's the why? What as a result of this change, what will things look like? Why are we going in that direction? Getting very clear about what's the gap, where are we now, where is it that we want to be? And involving the right people in that definition of the where we are right now, because that's also one of my frustrations sometimes, is that people talk about, okay, we need to make a change. We need to go to this place where we're more customer centric, for example. So let's kind of get on that now. What are the things that we need to do in order to do that? Well, we need to have a new system. We need to have our people trained. We need to, and it's okay. Hold on a second. Where are we now? And what's the shift? Let's get very clear about what that is, and understand what the pain points of our current situation are, because that's a bigger driver of change than the wonderful future that we have ahead of us. So, you want to look at both sides. What's the pain points and where's the future, and get as clear as you can, so that you can individually buy into that, but get the organization buying into that as well. And asking their opinion at that point, what they see is a great point to do it, because sometimes as well, as I mentioned, my sales VP, it's really hard to look 5 years into the future, but he could tell you what was wrong with where we were now. So
yeah, and I think you mentioned in your book that there is no real change unless people feel that the pain of the current situation is higher than the pain of a change.
Yes.
Because each time we have a change, we are moving outside the comfort zone, and then there is a pain. But if it's the current situation, we need to assess what is the pain now to make sure that it's bigger that in the future, and we will see a real improvement. Yeah. Otherwise, I guess that the lever we could have with people and organizations should be too weak to push them in the correct direction, the right direction.
Yeah, and people have got to feel it, haven't they? They have to feel where they are, and they have to feel the positive. Here's where we need to get to, because otherwise, it's really difficult to change, as you say.
You make a big part also in your book about the involvement of the people, which are for sure extremely important in a change management. Can you give us a word about that?
Yes, yeah. And of course, that's been really challenging over the last couple of years, hasn't it, to really involve people in the way that we would have liked to in the past. I think the biggest involvement of people is for everybody to understand why. So asking that question of, what do you see the current state right now? Getting them involved in that, and so that they feel two things. One, they feel for themselves, this is why we need to move, but also, and I'm going to help you do that. And so actually buy in, so that are along that journey as you talk. So involving people is really important. So yeah, how do you do that? That's also potentially where having a facilitator who collects that information dispassionately, neutrally, and objective in a way of doing that, as opposed in a systematic way, can be really useful, so that you spend that good time up front collecting that information and collecting a broad range, and then narrowing that down. That's actually a useful way of doing it. So involving people both one-on-one, but then in group situations where you can come together with, let's collect all the ideas. And we used to use lots of Post-it notes, didn't we? And so Post-it notes were great. And now we use electronic Post-it notes. And so, that's also good. And I think that's going to be, both of those things like Miro and Mural and VWall, which I use a lot of, using those tools are fantastic. And, we've really learnt a lot by using those tools, how quickly we can get to lots of ideas and consolidation of those ideas and moving on to, so what are we going to do? And we just need to, those are so such great tools for involving people. So using tools to involve people as well.
That's very important, yeah.
Yeah.
And especially now with remote or hybrid teams where we are not there all together anymore, or very it's becoming rare. And those tools are very powerful. And now, even so, sometimes I'm facilitating on-site workshop, or I have always a part on Miro or Miro, because I think that it's even easier to collect the data, to create a kind of summary. If we need to take let's say the sticky from one board to the other, it's way easier than doing that in a meeting room. Yes. And then sometimes it's more efficient also. It's
and we don't have to worry about what did that person mean when we have this scroll on the post-it note anymore. We can just take and merge and put in the output of the data. That's what it is. Yeah.
Save them, and we don't have all this large flip chart going on all over the place. That's very nice indeed. So thank you very much for this interview, Kathryn. That was very, very, very interesting. So once again, Leading for Change, we can find it in all a good bookshop, online or on sites. I just have three final questions for you, which are the kind of mandatory question in this podcast. So the first is, what book would you suggest, or are you reading now that are really interesting that you can share with us?
Well, I really like this one too. So this is
The Resilient Leader.
Resilient Leader. So this is one of my colleagues that wrote this. And the reason I like this is because there's quite a few pictures in it, but there's quizzes in here. So, you can assess how you're doing on things. There's practices that you can do here. So I really like this. So I keep going back to this one and dipping in again. It's one of those that you can just dip into and think about, how you are as a individual being resilient, how you can create an organization that's resilient, and how you can create a culture that's resilient. So I think that it's going to be really useful now and in the future. So I really like this one.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. When I was talking about books, I just realized that I forgot to question you about your book clubs, because I see a post on LinkedIn recently when you were mentioning that. And can you just explain us how it works?
Yeah, so what I'm doing is doing very, it seems very short because it's only an hour or an hour and a half with organizations. And what we do is we look at why it's important to be a leader of change at any level of an organization. So we talk about that, and we use VWall to post out why we think that's important. So everybody kind of thinks about it for themselves and thinks, okay, yes, maybe this is important. I need to pay attention. So we do that. And then we talk about what they think the success factors of change are. And one of the things I should also mention is, along with the book, there's a questionnaire that people can take that can fill in. So we can send that out to people if they want to try that. And what that does is, for the 10 chapters, it identifies, how well you think you're doing right now. So you can go in as an individual and get this self-assessment and choose then, maybe I need to look at how I'm choosing with change. I don't do that very well right now. So you can go in and just have a look at that chapter. So again, for people who don't like reading from cover to cover, if they just want to dip in at what their issue is, they can do that. To get back to the book club. In the book club, before we ask everybody who's coming to the book club to complete that, so that when we come to the session, we can consolidate, look at the overall results, And then we talk about what their biggest strength is. So let's share some great best practice, but we also talk about what their biggest challenge is. So, I can share some tips, or they can then go as a group and say, as actually for our organization, what we need to look at is having a facilitator. That's one of the things that we need to focus on. So they go and have a look at they can do that. So the questionnaire helps them do that. And so that's what it is, the book club. It's about understanding why it's important for you as an individual to lead for change, and what you think, and learning about, here's what you think the success factors of change are. So, yeah.
To be very relevant to do that prior to any change, in fact.
Yes, exactly.
To make sure that all the organizations are on the same page and everybody has the same maybe words, the same language, and know a global process.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And then they can also focus in on, okay, it is in implementing that we need to and implement flawlessly. How are we going to do that differently, and actually do that assessment and think about that as a group?
Okay, thank you. I will share the link to the assessment in the share note of this podcast so that our listener may try it for themselves and their organization. So thank you again, Kathryn. So the second question that I would like to ask you was about a kind of mantra or proverbs that you are living with in a while, maybe.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've already started to talk about this when I thought again and reflected on this. I'm struggling to choose one, which is really bad because I'm such a person who says prioritize all of the time. That's part of implementing flawlessly. So what I did was, they're both very similar. One is what Simon Sinek says, which is start with why.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll have heard that already.
Yes.
This podcast, that is something that I clearly live by all of the time. Start with why. That's the most important thing, because unless you understand why, nobody's going to move, and you have to do that. And then linked with that, which is what I talk about a lot, is focus on the outcome, which is a bit about the why, but it just goes through everything almost that I do, because it could be about the change itself, but it could be about a project, or it could be about a meeting I'm having. What's the outcome? And it's not necessarily just what you're going to deliver, but it's going to be what's the impact on stakeholders or whatever. So it's start with the end in mind, I guess, is another way of saying it, but it's focus on the outcomes is the mantra that I live by as well.
Okay, thank you for that, Kathryn. And the very last question is about a productivity tips that you are using regularly that makes your life easier.
Yeah, and then maybe it's linked to the focus on the outcome one, because definitely if you do that, then the creation of an agenda falls from, in a meeting or in any task, it comes from the outcome. It doesn't come from, we've already talked about this. It comes from let's understand what the outcome is. Let's create that, and then we can break it down. So what do we have to do that, both in the meeting and prior to the meeting? And if you do that, that's the way to have a really effective meeting.
And it's very too often something that we miss or we do quickly because we don't have enough time. And unfortunately, I've ran probably less meetings than you do, but a lot of meetings in my life. And it's clear that the ones which are well prepared with a very defined agenda are always the one where we really have something at the end.
Yes.
And not only blah, blah all over the place. And at the end, say, okay, what's the point finally?
Yes.
And, yeah, preparation and agenda are very key.
And I just remember one of the big stories I had was when a leader, there was a group that were totally all over the place. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, you've only got a day to sort this out, big issues that they were facing, but they had to do some long-term planning. And so there's so many different things that we were trying to cover. And I just talked to all of them and said, well, what's the outcome here? What's the outcome? And then we put together an agenda. And I was still thinking, this is going to be really hard to do this. But because we were so focused on the outcome, because we got a very clear agenda, and because everybody had come very prepared, because we'd had these discussions, we finished 10 minutes early. I was so excited about finish 10 minutes early. That doesn't happen, does it, very often? Especially not on a meeting like that. So, yeah.
Very important tool. So thank you for all that. Just to finish this interview, where can we find you on the internet?
All right. So yeah, I have a website. So it's www.kathrynsimpson.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. So you'll find, Kathryn Simpson. Should be able to find me there. Yeah. Those are the big things. I don't tweet as much as I can, but I could. But those are the two. Those are the two things that you may be able to find information. And yes, as you said, the book is on Amazon and all the other bestsellers. So yes,
that's perfect. Thank you very much, Kathryn, for spending this time with you. And it was very, very interesting. And I hope that our auditors will really appreciate the time you spent with us, sharing your experience and a few words about your book. So thank you, and maybe we will see you around later.
Yes, thank you very much. That was great. It went by very quickly.
Thank you, Kathryn, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.